slowly starting the second part. I see that the coffee break has also got interesting discussion between the participants and panelists and others, but we still have two presentations to go, both of them very, very interesting. And we start with Diana Calciu, who's a senior associate on regulatory affairs and competition at the GIDE Brussels. Who will be talking about disclosure of data in platform business and competition risks in this platform business.
Thank you very much, Bogdan. I hope it works. So first of all, thank you to the organizers, Tabata and Enea, for inviting me here with such a learned audience. I'm happy to be speaking on these hot topics of data and competition. So I thought I would give you a couple of examples of cases, especially instructed at the EU Commission level on data and competition. So mostly looking at the way one collects data, but also other competition risks. And in the second part, I will give you some insight into what is cooking in Brussels as ideas and based on access to data to maintain fair competition. So I just passed the first slide because luckily Diego has put you up to speed to what is strategic competitive information that should not be exchanged. And I will go directly to the first case, which is the Amazon case. So I don't know how familiar you are with this case, and of course here I'm going to comment more on the public information because it's an ongoing investigation. But basically, the issue in this case is the Commission is investigating the collection and the use by Amazon of merchants' data. So it came further to complaints by merchants, which the Commission has collected as the occasion of the sector inquiry and allegations that Amazon might be using the data to enhance its own offerings on the retail market, learn what products sell well, and then engage in anti-competitive practices. So the Commission announced, and that is public, that it will be investigating the dual role of Amazon, first as an online marketplace on the market for online intermediation for merchants, and as well as a retailer which competes on the downstream market with the merchants. So possible infringement here again, it's speculation at this stage because the Commission hasn't disclosed its theories of harm. So the Commission says it might be investigating the use and the collection of the data on 101 and 102. So 101, why 101? Because the Commission is looking, for example, at data relating to prices, quantities sold by the merchants, rebate campaigns, quantities stocked, and because Amazon is actually in a horizontal relationship with the merchants on the retail offering market, there might be some issues of exchange of competitively sensitive information. 102, so 102 is the abuse of dominant position. Here, different possible theories of harm. And I think the Commission is still looking a lot into whether a lot of the factual of the case, for example, whether Amazon used some information on the products that sold well and then decided to market its own products. What effect did it have on the products of the third-party merchants? Did it have an effect on the price? Did it engage in predatory pricing, so cuts the costs of its own offerings? Then there's also possibly an exploitative abuse theory, saying that provided Amazon is dominant on the online intermediation market, it might have leveraged that dominance to be outperforming on the retail markets, and also the fact that the data which was acquired from the merchants was acquired also on the basis of the dependency those merchants had on its platform. So I think this, before moving on to sort of adjacent thing, I think this shows, and it's too early to conclude, but that the Commission is starting to look into the way companies, actually, especially companies with high shares in the market and who are competing at the retail level, use the data which they have received as an online intermediation, and whether this could potentially be anti-competitive. So I think that's something that to be kept in mind for the market. Now, the other thing which can also be of interest is that there was a related complaint and investigation in Germany on, again on Amazon, but this time was based on the company's terms and conditions. So here again, in the end, Amazon settled the case, but the German competition authority investigated whether, because of its dominant position, notably, the terms and conditions were anti-competitive, for example. It investigated particularly the use of a exception of liability provision, or the use of a jurisdiction clause, which was an exclusive jurisdiction for disputes at the place where Amazon is business. So all this shows you that there are also some national competition authorities which are looking into terms and conditions, also because of the regulation which came into effect at EU level, which is the platform business regulation, which requires that online platforms have transparent terms and conditions, terms and conditions that when they write, for example, terminations, business users have a justification for the termination. When they change the terms and conditions, these should be first communicated to the business users. So I think this other Amazon case is more about compliance with the regulation on platform business, which is about to apply in Europe, and which I can talk about a bit more later. So these are the Amazon case. Now moving on to another case of data collection and data use. There's been a lot of talk about the Facebook case. So as you probably know, Facebook has this policy where if you join Facebook, you accept, or at least the company has a policy by which they not only use your data on Facebook, but they also use the data that you provide by using third-party platforms which have a Facebook-like button integrated in it, and any other apps like WhatsApp and Instagram, which are owned by Facebook. So the German Federal Cartel Office, slightly surprisingly for a competition lawyer, and this has created much debate, has for the first time used data privacy as a parameter of competition and constructed an abuse of dominance position, considering that Facebook was dominant in the German market for online private social networks, and that it had committed an exploitative abuse by using exploitative business terms, not respecting privacy. Now, one has to put this into perspective, because I think it's very specific of German law, where they founded the investigation and the allegation of abuse on a jurisprudence which in Germany considers that in an imbalanced relation where one actor is dominant, inappropriate contractual terms and conditions which infringe German constitutional rights, which is the case of a violation of data privacy, would constitute an abuse under German competition law. So, in effect, the German Cartel Office took the position that the GDPR and the lack of compliance with privacy constitutes a legal standard determining competitive abuses. Now, I think the competition community was a bit divided on whether really there was a fear of harm in competition. And I certainly was personally a bit surprised. I would be interested if any of the privacy lawyers have their opinion on this, but I was a bit surprised that this could possibly have been dealt with by data competition authorities instead of competition authorities. And especially that there's a difference in terms of fines for data privacy and competition. There might be actually an incentive, to be honest, to go in front of the competition authorities where the fines could be up to 10% of turnover, while in privacy it's 4%. But nonetheless, this case was at the limits of competition law, and the last evolution in this case was that the German court, so Facebook appealed in front of the German court and decided to ask also for an interim measures ending the appeal. And the Düsseldorf Court of Appeal in September actually said that the decision of the FCO should be suspended because it considered that the competition authority had not sufficiently characterized the effect on competition, or it had not proved the counterfactual that what would have happened in what would have been the effect of competition as a counterfactual to Facebook's behavior. And also there was an issue of whether the data collected by Facebook was excessive or not, whether the consumer could potentially, was it really locked in, or could it potentially say, well, I simply, if I know that they're going to use my data for other things, I simply refuse to subscribe to Facebook. So this is still to be decided because it's gone behind to the Supreme Court. But I think I would suspect that a typical case of more privacy violation will be rather constrained to data protection authorities and less investigated by competition authorities. Let's see. Okay, the case, the Google shopping case, I understand from Raluca that it has been treated last year, and since quite some of you might have already been here, I don't want to repeat what has been said, so it's just in a nutshell is to say that this is a case where the Commission investigated Google because of its dominant position on the search engines and its favoring of its own shopping comparison service on the specific market for comparison of shopping services, and it was a kind of case of self-referencing, and that's why the Commission imposed fines on Google. So my last case before into the hot topics of data in Brussels was the Booking case. So as you know, Booking is an online mediation platform, and the case with Booking was a case about applying parity clauses. So there are different types of parity clauses. There are wide parity clauses and narrow parity clauses. So what is wide parity clause is when the retailer requests the online intermediation platform to apply the same price, or at least the better price on its platform in comparison to any other distribution channels, online, offline, direct or indirect. While the narrow parity clause, or most favored nation clause, is a more reduced restriction whereby the retailer requests the online marketplace to give it the same condition as those published on the direct website or direct online service of the the retailer. So what Booking was actually investigated for was that it actually applied wide parity clauses. So it requested from hotels that they give the best prices to Booking, that's the rooms, availability, booking, and cancellation conditions. So the best in comparison to the hotel's own website, but also in comparison to any other platforms. So here there was a lot of competition authorities conducting independent investigations of French, Italian, the Swedish, and it's interesting because they didn't all conclude the same thing, because these parity clauses and competition law, most favored nations clauses, are considered widely as potentially having pro-competitive but also anti-competitive consequences. So on the pro-competitive side, some people argue that if a retailer knows that its supplier will not sell to other retailers at lower prices, that will actually encourage the retailer to invest in providing the sales and service support for the product. So that's on the pro-competitive. On the anti-competitive side, these clauses, especially the wide parity clause, has the potential to soften competition or facilitate collusion by making deviations from price agreements easier to observe. And also other people argue that wide MFNs actually give the incentive for platforms such as Booking to increase their commission levels, because there will not be any sort of constraint from the hotel, from the supplier, because of the clause they cannot exercise such constraint. So the way this was handled was that in most jurisdictions, so French jurisdiction, Italian, Swedish, they actually settled with Booking, actually making the commitment to take out the wide price parity clauses and just let the narrow ones. The German Competition Authority, for example, did not consider that even the narrow one was anti-competitive, and as a result, quite a lot of member states actually took laws to ban parity clauses. So that's the case of France, Italy, I think, Belgium. But I think that, so moving a bit out of this case, what you need to retain more largely is that wide parity clauses and most favored nations have the potential to be anti-competitive, and that's still the majority of the view of the competition authority. So they are not prohibited per se, but you will have to, if there are such clauses in your contracts, you will have to provide quite a lot of reasons for the efficiencies that these may create. And for example, the UK Competition Authority gave quite some advice suggesting that narrow price parity clauses or any other parity clauses should not go beyond the scope of what is strictly necessary to achieve the related efficiencies. And they, for example, suggested that it should not apply to existing customers because their free riding efficiencies are less likely to apply to such customers. So I don't know if you have any questions at this stage, or whether we want to move on to other hot topics in Brussels on data sharing and access to data.
No comments, but I would like to maybe to get a conclusion out of these cases. So what would be the lessons learned for bigger companies that want to that are maybe not necessarily in this market but in the other market from these cases of the Commission? What you should not do
Okay, well, I mean, again, I mean, put this these cases into perspective because they are platform cases. They are quite specific cases where there's a lot of network effects. There are shares of these companies, as we know, are very high. That there's a potential of conflict of interest because they are both online intermediation and they actually operate at the retail level. So it's quite specific. But what could be transposed to any other sector, I would say, well, whenever you have very high market shares, even more so when you have a sort of vertically integrated structure, you have to be careful to not discriminate, to avoid wider price parity clauses, unless you can improve efficiencies in a distributor relationship. Other than that, also in terms of collection of data, I think here it's very difficult yet to see the clear path because the Amazon case is not being concluded. But here again, be careful of what is necessary to collect and what could, if you are competing with someone at the same level, what could potentially be exclusionary.
I see. For everyone, the cases are very clear.
It would be useful to know these lessons also from the perspective of a supplier, in order to understand that not everything that is asked from you by this type of company is necessarily legal, and that you also have rights, including to oppose disclosing all kinds of information. So it works the other way around as well.
I agree. Okay, then I will move on to the hot topics, or at least what is being discussed. So what I was focusing on by the cases was the use and collection of data, but the other parts of the game is access to data. What data you as a company would like to access to from a competitor, and the Commission is seriously thinking of different ways of getting data disclosed in a way which could be maintaining innovation for services. So there was a Commission report on, so the Commission hired an expert group to give a sort of report on digitalization issues in a digital world, and one chapter was focused on data. And amongst these suggestions which were made, which are quite high level at this moment, but which might feed into some future actions of the Commission. So one was to possibly increase data portability. So we know that the GDPR has given the possibility to for a consumer to ask for the data in an aggregated form and to be transferred to another service provider to avoid lock-in effects. So one possible idea the expert report was thinking of is whether we should have a more stringent data portability regime that can be imposed on a dominant firm. Talking about a dominant firm, there was a bit of a panic/scoop in Brussels the last few weeks, suggesting that the German sort of advisor or that Germany was looking into the possibility of obliging data sharing of company from a certain threshold of market shares, and this could be something like 30%. That's what we hear, but this again we have to monitor in the future weeks and months. That's something that has been circulated of an obligation of data sharing as soon as you reach a certain amount of data of market shares. Now, other ways of sharing data and encouraging innovation are sectorial regulations. So, for example, some of you in the banking sector might be familiar with the Payment Services Directive, which encourages, from the point of view of competition and innovation, banks to open up data to other payment providers, fintechs, techs. So that's already the case of trying to open up accounts, payment account data for other service providers other than banks to be able to provide services and innovate in the market. So that is something that might be replicated in other industries. Then the expert report also mentions data sharing and data pooling arrangements. I don't know if in some of your industries you use such arrangements, certainly in the insurance sector. It could be useful also to have information on incidents, accidents, statistics, etc. And interestingly, the reports suggest that data sharing and data pooling arrangements are considered as, you start from the premise that they are pro-competitive, they enhance data access, they may resolve data bottlenecks, and the only thing is that the limit is whether, for it to be still competitive and not go into the anti-competitive part, is that the access has to be open to any new market entrant, and also that the conditions must be friendly conditions, so they must be non-discriminatory, fair and reasonable fees for being granted sort of entry to the data sharing. So I think that's something that is still looked at rather positively. Now, the other thing and theory that has been discussed within the expert report, but also more generally in the competition community, is the essential facility doctrine. So I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it was this doctrine that if you have an essential facility, the holder of this essential facility could be requested to share access to this essential facility, provided that there's, in the secondary market, there's a product which depends on this essential facility or service, and that if the access to the essential facility would not be granted, there would be no effective competition on the secondary market, no development of the product. And this is something that has been studied and discussed, whether data could be considered as essential facility. Now, it's a tricky one because the burden is to, on the person who wants to request data from a competitor, from a dominant undertaking, to show that data is essential to it being able to provide a service in the secondary market. And without this data, I mean, it's practically impossible for him to replicate this data, and without this data, there's no effective competition. So this has been discussed. There's no consensus yet, but I think we will see more and more, possibly, companies trying, if they find something which looks like an essential facility, trying to argue this. And to give you an example, for example, the French Competition Authority a couple of years ago recognized an essential facility where on the sales of online tickets for trains, so it was the SNCF case where the railway incumbent had a distribution, its own distribution channel, its online distribution channel, and then it allowed travel agents to also sell its tickets. But the problem was that the booking platform, which contained fares, the train, availability, etc., had a direct connection for the vertically integrated distribution channel of the railway undertaking. The travel agents had to pay quite an expensive license to get access to the online booking platform and the French authority said that the online booking platform was an essential facility because it's true that the railway undertaking was a legal monopoly, that a travel agent had to use this to be able to sell tickets in France, and there was no way for him to be able to replicate the information that the system contained. And I hear that in Germany there's a similar sort of recognition regarding also online sales of trains with Deutsche Bahn portal, which contains here again an incumbent which contains all the information regarding incidents on trains, delays, and real-time traffic data, to which ticket distributors who have an arrangement with Deutsche Bahn to distribute the tickets do not have access to, while the own distribution channel of Deutsche Bahn obviously has access to. So these are kind of examples of what have already been recognized or are recognized as essential facilities. Now the issue will be whether and to what extent one can prove that in your industries that you need, it's absolutely essential to have access to a specific type of data that only the incumbent has, a dominant undertaking for you to claim access to that data. So this is also a theory that will need to be tested in front of the national competition authorities. The other news to be monitored is that a bit like to build on what I've said, apparently the DG Connect, so the Information Society Service of the Commission is seriously thinking about regulation and in some industry sectors imposing data sharing obligations, also possibly a legal obligation to ensure full portability of consumer-generated IoT data. So there's a lot of, coupled to the competition, ways of accessing data. There is also a lot of possible movements in the few weeks and more months of the new Commission on data sharing in specific industries to maintain fair competition and to allow innovation in different industry sectors. So maybe last thing, talking about platform to business, as I was mentioning, the platform to business regulation. So this regulation was passed by the Commission and will apply from 12th of July next year. So this regulates the actual relationship between online platforms, no matter their market shares. So this time it's really regulation not related to competition thresholds, and which regulates the relationship with the business users which provide their services or their goods on the online platform. So here platforms will have to comply in the next few months, also because, as I said also in Romania, the competition authority will be the main enforcer also of the compliance with this regulation. So in a nutshell, what this regulation does is, in parallel to the cases I talked about, Google, Booking, Amazon to a certain extent, actually regulates the terms and conditions of the platforms and online search engines, and requests a minimal sort of transparency levels, which are, first of all, I said the transparency of the terms and conditions. So these have to be communicated to the business user in an understandable way, a simple way. Any changes have to be notified 15 days before they come into effect. If not, these are null and void. Also, if the platform decides to terminate or suspend the account of the business user, it has to notify it 30 days in advance and give it justification. Now on access to data, it's interesting because it actually obliges providers of online intermediation, so marketplaces, to describe what kind of data they actually have from the business user and from the consumer, how they use it, how under what conditions, whether this data is actually shared with third parties. So you can kind of see that here competition and regulation are two parts of the same coin, where they try to go hand in hand and to avoid any possible potential abuses of or anti-competitive effects. And the same goes as regards specific obligations to for platforms to describe whether there's a parameter that of ranking the business users and on what basis. So here again, it's to avoid sort of preferencing, self-preferencing like Google, and also for vertically integrated structures. It obliges the platform to also say what preferential conditions it gives to the vertically integrated entity. And last but not least, an illustration of the MFN is the actual obligation for platforms to explain when they've used most favored nation clauses, what are the legal, economic, or commercial considerations behind such clauses. So I think this is, in a nutshell, what is the kind of two sides of competition and regulations which apply to platforms, and the kind of issues that are being investigated in these areas.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question and I'm trying to summarize the situation at this point in time concerning competition law and data access. My understanding so far is that competition law intervened at this point only at the platform level. So access to platform, personally I see it as a different thing than access to data. A platform is a marketplace. We cannot at this point define access to data, to raw data, as a marketplace at this point. So aside the perspective, the potential regulation of access to data, which is, I understand, going to be implemented, reinforced also by the competition, but that is exposed regulation, exposed intervention. How do you see the development of competition law in respect to access to data, not to platforms, but access purely to data, especially in the context of restrictions which apply under the GDPR, because supposedly there is a dominant undertaking in a certain area of data. It remains to be defined, that dominance in the data world. The company has access and processes the data based on GDPR consent. It cannot give access to that data because GDPR does not allow it to give access. But theoretically, competition law obliges the same company to give access to that data. So how do you see this evolving in the future?
Well, I wish I had a crystal ball, but I think that it will be more through regulation, generally to be able to reconcile, as you say, the kind of competition and data protection aspects. Then the other thing is that there are some sectors, for example, machinery or things like that, where and not related to platform, where indeed competition law might require that this might be indispensable for a secondary market product to develop or as I said, the issues of distribution, where your distributor needs to have access to the data. But there's no, at this time, there's no real line as to how this data might be accessed. I really sincerely believe that it will be still through regulation on sector, and I think industry sectors, or if you call that essential facility.
Okay, thank you. I see no other specific comments. I have a very slight one on the law in progress part. I'm surprised that the Commission is still looking at the right to portability of data when, from my perspective, we haven't seen any kind of developments in GDPR come into place. This is a wonderful idea by policymakers. I think they're just dreaming of how people will get out of Facebook and go on Tinder. I don't know. Anyway, but the point is, it looks like a very interesting idea, but in practice, it's very not working. Also, what I find from my practical perspective is that data is so much linked to platforms that when you take it out of there, it doesn't really fit other platforms, even though it looks the same, but in practice it has all this metadata behind it and correlations. It's very complicated to go into that part. So I'm surprised. How do you see this? This is more like wishful thinking or like real policy progress?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to have your view. So you would think that it should be coupled, because I can send the message to the Commission, but it's better to have an interoperability, sort of, for you. If you say that the data does not really match.
I mean, for me, data portability in the context of personal data, it's very complicated because the platforms are the ones that are creating the ecosystems, and you as a user, you don't really have a choice. So either you have a simple tool, either you have nothing. So in practice, it doesn't work. And this is how I see it like this. And this is why I'm surprised that the Commission is still looking at it, maybe from a different angle. So for me, it still sounds like a very nice policy idea. Maybe I'm wrong.
Okay, well, I mean, it remains to be seen, but it's true that I don't know if from a privacy perspective, I don't know how much the data portability has been used so far. You will see probably that you use it for the telecoms or something like that.
That's number portability. It's a totally different discussion.
That's true. But okay, it remains to be seen how. But I take note that you're a bit suspicious of that idea of the Commission.
Okay. So apparently I've also covered the question from Luca somehow, although we didn't talk about this. So thank you very much, Diana.